All right, so today I want to talk about OAuth I think we'll probably start our. Your computer is. Let me grab it for you. So we're probably gonna start Rails projects Monday. So in advance of that, I wanted to put this out there. OAuth is one of those things that is perennially super confusing for people. Password is 33 lowercase west and then the number 26. What was I just saying? Oh yeah. OAuth is super confusing, so I wanted to tackle this before we get to building projects. And I think it's super fascinating. And what I used to do is try and do really low level, show people how OAuth is implemented. OAuth is really confusing, so I have bailed on that. But there are some Ruby gems that wrap OAuth and make this a lot easier for us. So I'm just gonna take you through how to build an app that has two features. Sign in with Twitter. I'm sure you've seen sign in to an app with Twitter or sign in with Facebook or sign in with GitHub or something like that. And then the ability to actually make a request to Twitter on behalf of a user and show their tweets in your application.
I wanted to do that 2 weeks ago. I wanted to do that with Tumblr.
Here we are.
Welcome.
I'm always 2 weeks behind you. Okay, so I'm just gonna fire up a Rails app. This is one where it'll probably be too difficult to follow along, but feel free to if you want to.
Are you going to use has secure password and all that?
I'm not gonna use has secure password.
Does the O stand for anything?
I don't know. So the goal of this is I'm going to have an application, and I want users to be able to log into my application, but they're going to log in using Twitter. So have you ever been to a website where it says sign in with Twitter or sign in with Facebook, and you don't give them your username or password, you just click a button, and Facebook sort of logs you in, or Twitter sort of logs you in. That's what we're going to replicate. Yes.
When that happens, is it that I'm saying that in my application, since Twitter gave you the okay, I'm gonna give you the access to whatever content, or is Twitter saying I have Blake's information, I'm just gonna give you Blake's relevant information, and you're gonna make a profile for him?
Sort of both, but hopefully that will all become clear as we drive through this.
Could you let's say I log in through my Facebook, right? You can read your Facebook posts?
Let's just hold on the questions. I think this will become clear as we start going. But please come back. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so to start, again, to reframe this, my goal is I'm making a Rails app, and I'm gonna want to be able to log in to this app using Twitter. I'm not gonna build my own login system. I'm gonna use Twitter's login system. Why might I want to use Twitter's login system rather than build my own login system? Login is kind of a solved problem. So nothing about your app is probably going to make you $1 million if you have the fanciest login system in the world. So typically, as a developer, you don't want to spend your time doing things that are kind of solved problems. You want to add some unique value. So there's that. Then there's just the additional issue of security. If I have to store your login and password, your username and password, if it gets stolen, I'm kind of on the hook for that. So in the same way that Stripe kind of abstracted this idea of payments and I don't necessarily ever have to touch your credit card, that's fantastic because I don't have to deal with the security risk. So if Facebook gets hacked, whatever, everyone's fucked. But if I'm using Facebook's login system, like I'm not really responsible for Facebook being hacked, and I don't really have to worry about storing your username and password anymore. So from a security perspective, it's awesome. I don't have to deal with it. From a just general, like I don't want to build login. It's kind of a boring solved problem. That's cool too. And additionally, it allows me to then interact with Twitter. Cool. So the whole goal of this first part will be allowing you to log in with Twitter. So I'm going to open this up. And there's two gems, sort of three gems that are going to be relevant here. One's called oauth, this gem, and one's called oauth Twitter. So the way that oauth works is somebody made this abstract gem because this is a problem that you're going to want to use open authentication or OAuth with a whole bunch of different providers. So you can do this with Facebook, you can do it with GitHub, you can do it with Twitter, like the list continues. So somebody said, let me make this general thing called oauth that sort of abstracts this idea of doing this. And then any individual sort of platform can make their own little gem that interacts with this gem. So oauth always works with another gem. So I'm going to look up oauth Twitter. And I'll add both of these gems to my gem file. Bundle. So while that's running, I also want to draw the distinction between oauth and oauth. So like a little history of OAuth. There's a good post if you're curious, if you like these sorts of things. Don't read it now, but read it at some point. So there was OAuth 1 and there was OAuth 2. So what is the problem that OAuth is trying to solve? The problem that OAuth is trying to solve is, let's say I want to read your tweets in my application. So I don't want to go to twitter.com. I want to be able to like show your tweets in my application. It would be a terrible system that you come to my application and you give me your Twitter username and password. Because now every application in the world that wants to use my tweets in their application, you have to give out your credentials to each of those sites. And from a security perspective, every time you give out your password, you're kind of having that problem where the least secure thing is the most likely vector for attack. So Twitter's probably pretty secure. My random Rails website, I don't know shit about security, right? It's pretty likely to be hacked, right? So you don't want to give me your Twitter credentials. What you would like is, you would like Twitter to sort of say, it's okay for me to use your tweets, but you don't want to give me your username and password. So OAuth was this thing where everyone sort of came together in this nice way in the tech world, and they said, can we come up with a solution to this problem? Can we all agree on a protocol that we could use, some sort of standard, so that nobody has to give out their username and password to everybody? So we came up with OAuth 1.0, and like typical for protocols, like people were like, oh, there's all sorts of problems with OAuth 1.0. Similar to how when we came up with HTTP 1, people said there's all sorts of problems. They started using it, and then they said, okay, what about 1.1? Now we're working on HTTP 2. So similar with OAuth, there was OAuth 1, then there was OAuth 1.0a, and then there was OAuth 2. If you read this post, it's called OAuth 2.0 and the Road to Hell. You can probably take from it that like working on OAuth 2.0 was not like a great experience for this guy. So he was one of the big OAuth people. He was one of the people that were trying to push from 1 to 2 and fix all of these problems. But as you might imagine, there's all these different people that had various interests and ideas about how to solve these problems. And so he says, at the end, I reached the conclusion that OAuth 2.0 is a bad protocol. So in his opinion, OAuth 1.0 was better than OAuth 2.0, and we actually took a step back with going to 2.0. The reason I mention this is because now we have this great situation where different providers have chosen different strategies. So Twitter, I believe, is OAuth 1.0a. I think Facebook is OAuth 2.0. So one of the great things is before you start trying to oauth with someone, you have to figure out which version of the protocol they're using. And if you try and do OAuth 1.0 with someone who's 2.0, it won't work.
Yeah.
And it won't give you like an error that makes any sense, and you'll spend days maybe wanting to kill yourself trying to figure out what's going on. No personal experience there. So that's super important, and I just think it's like a fascinating sort of historical thing. I'm always interested in how like the intersection of technology and people, you often get not necessarily the best solution. You just get whatever people produce. Because at the end of the day, we're all people. All right. So, anyways, how do you do this? Okay. So I'm gonna also sort of try and give you a sense of like, let's say I didn't actually know how this worked. Reading documentation is, I think, a skill as a programmer. And now that you guys are heading into Rails projects, you're going to want to do all of this stuff, and you're going to have like these little things. You're like, how do I do X? And being able to read the documentation of gems is super helpful. But what I found was when I was first doing this, there's like so much stuff, and it's like, well, how do I know what's the relevant stuff? So as I go through this, I'm going to kind of try and talk you through what's important and what's not important, and how I sort of like identify those things. Other than the fact that I already know the answer, but I'm going to try and pretend like I didn't already know the answer, so we can a little bit get a sense of how do you figure out what's relevant in the documentation and what's not. Because this stuff's hard to read. It often references stuff that you don't necessarily know about. So like, let's say I know that I need to use oauth. This is the gem that's going to solve my problem, so I'm just going to start reading the docs. So it says oauth is a library that standardizes multi-provider authentication for web apps. Okay, that sounds like what I'm doing. It was created to be powerful, flexible. Okay, I don't care, right? So this is just sort of an intro. I can already tell that like I don't care about any of this stuff. So getting started, right? Okay, like when I start to see some code, I'm like, okay, this is where I'm gonna actually like get some value. So I see getting started, and then I see Sinatra oauth. It's a rack middleware, cool. Like I still don't care, right? Because I'm using Rails, so I'm just gonna keep skipping. oauth is built for multi-provider authentication. I may want to leave room for multiple strategies. Note there's no difference. This is an example you might put into Rails initializer. Okay, so suddenly I see Rails initial. I'm like, okay, this is an example he's giving me for what one might do for Rails. And I would encourage you, when you do stuff like this, just straight up copy paste this stuff. And see if you can get anything working. What I find a lot of times new programmers do is they try to do everything at once, and they don't test anything along the way. And then when the whole thing doesn't work, it's really hard to figure out which of the pieces of the puzzle, maybe 90% of it's correct, there's only one thing that's wrong, but you can't figure out which thing is wrong because you did them all at once. If you do them sort of one by one, you can start to figure out what's wrong. So he says make this initializer in Rails. So initializers are files that get run when Rails boots up. So I can just throw an initializer into my Rails app in config initializers, call it oauth. Doesn't matter what you call it. Anything in this folder will automatically get run. So I can just paste this in here. So copy paste this stuff in here, but try and like read through this like it's Ruby code and get a little bit of a sense of what it's doing. What I find is that people will wholesale copy paste this stuff out of gems and then expect it to magically work. Typically, there's something in here that's generic that you need to change to be specific to you or your application. So it says Rails application config middleware use. So these are all method calls. We're chaining a whole bunch of method calls. This is an argument to that method call. And then this whole method takes a block, right? And this block, this is clearly has to be a method call. This is a method call that has an argument to it, developer, unless Rails end equals production. So I happen to know that this Rails end equals production is the way in Rails you say, what environment am I in? Boolean, am I in the production environment, yes or no? So it's going to run this provider line, this provider method, unless we're in the production environment. Then it says provider Twitter, env Twitter key, and env Twitter secret. Does anybody know what env is? Environment, right? So if I type env from the command line, I get this hash of key value pairs. for my computer, if I come into IRB and I type env, that's the Ruby way of accessing that same hash, and I get that same hash in Ruby. So this is the thing that most people get wrong in this whole thing. If you get this wrong, I will freak out. So please pay attention. So env is a hash. So if I key into a hash with the key of Twitter key, what is that going to do? Return a value. So this presupposes what? Right. So that there's a key of Twitter key in my environment hash, and it has a value. If you do not have a Twitter key in your environment, that value will be nil, which is probably not a good thing, right? So we probably want this to have a value, and we don't know what that value is yet. We have some notion that like there's some key and secret that we need to get from Twitter, right? So what I often advocate people do just at the beginning, before you figure out how to use your environment, if that part's confusing, just like hard code your secret in here, or my key. This is insecure, and so if you push it to GitHub, you'll expose your keys and that sort of thing. But you'll probably save yourself a lot of trouble by just starting off saying, okay, these are two values, my key and my secret, and I need to replace them with my actual keys and my actual secret. All right, so that's that. Yes?
So why is putting in the hash of the key, why is that more
Secure?
secure?
Because this file is going to go to GitHub, and typically you're going to have, what?
The hash is
Yeah, so typically, like, I mean, your environment is stored on your computer, so that there's no way to get that sent to GitHub. But typically what you would do is you would have something that would set these env things. So there's a couple gems that do it that will, if you have a file like in the right place in your application, it will move those key value pairs into your environment, and then you git ignore that file. And so you have to manually kind of like send that file around, you SSH to your server and put that file on there, so whatever computers need that in their environment.
So by computer you mean server? Like,
Yes. Yeah. And you would never like store that at GitHub. Okay. Cool. All right. So I got this set up. I'm gonna delete this because I don't know what it's doing, and I have a sense that like Twitter as my provider like kind of makes sense. That looks to me like what I need to do. So where do I get my key and my secret? I happen to know, but let's say you didn't know. So I'm going to say Twitter register application. So I'm making an application. This is the flow you'll do with any other external service. You need to say, hey, I'm making a new app and I want to get keys from you. So I'm just typing in Twitter. How do I register my app with you, Twitter? I want Twitter to let you know that I'm making an app. So there's apps.twitter.com. I come over here, and as you can see, this is not the first time I've done this. So I have a whole bunch of old apps that I've made with various levels of success. So I had one class I did this sort of where like it was working in the morning, and then when I did the lecture, it stopped working, and then I was like, I had to stop the lecture, get it working again, and then I came back, and then it stopped working again. And I was just like, I give up, guys. Like, I'm so frustrated. So hopefully that will not happen now. All right, so my application name, whatever.
name application is blowing Jill's mind.
How do you spell Jill?
That is the question. Apparently GIL. Apparently.
All right, so callback URL. This is one of the most important parts.
Yeah, I fucked up there. I put Google.
So this usually ends up being like actually like a really weird thing. So let's talk about what is going to happen before I fill this out. So let me keep reading through OmniAuth. OmniAuth is extremely low touch, awesome. To use OmniAuth, you need only to redirect users to auth provider, where provider is the name of the strategy, for example, developer or Twitter. So rather than auth provider, again, this is one of those things that's generic, and I'm going to replace it with the actual thing that I'm using, which is Twitter. And then it says from there, OmniAuth will take over and take the user through the necessary steps to authenticate them with the chosen strategy. So let me draw the OAuth flow for you. This is super confusing. So OmniAuth says I have to direct people to /auth/Twitter. And then it says it will take care of the rest. So what actually happens is behind the scenes, OmniAuth will redirect this. So if I send a GET request to auth Twitter, it meta programs a route for this. And what it will do is it will redirect to Twitter. And there's an authentication URL at Twitter. So they're going to send me to Twitter to the authentication URL. I forget what it is off the top of my head, but let's say it's like Twitter, we'll see it in a second, .com/auth, and then you're going to see a bunch of key value pairs that are part of the OAuth protocol. So once I come here, you'll see that familiar page where it says like log in to Twitter. So you're going to put your username and password at twitter.com. Once you've logged into Twitter, Twitter is doing the login basically for my app, and Twitter's going to say Blake is the person that he says he is. Right? They have my username and password now. I didn't give it to this website. I gave it to Twitter, and then Twitter will send another browser redirect, which tells my browser send me a new request to this new URL. And so this is where the callback URL comes from. So Twitter says, once I'm done, I don't know where to send you, right? I don't know where you want to catch this next part of the process at. So this is where, like, when you put the callback URL, so this is like redirect to whatever you said for the callback URL. So typically, what's the address of your server when you're in development? Localhost, right? So typically, you would want like your server to be localhost. And then whatever, right? You could have a route anywhere in your app. Call it like capture Twitter or whatever, right? We know how to make a route in Rails, so we have to tell Twitter where to send us back to. Yes.
Can you change your callback once you've already saved it?
Yeah. You can edit all of this stuff once you've created it.
Oh, thank God. Mine's still Google.
So I'm going to say localhost 3000 / like my, what did I call it? Capture Twitter. And then I'm going to say, yes, I agree. Create my Twitter application. And I'm going to get an error. What's that? Oh. Description is too short. Okay. That was unanticipated. Not a valid URL format. Not a valid URL format. Whatever is already taken for a name. All right, let's try this again.
What is the not a valid URL?
So I still get not a valid URL format. So this annoying thing that happens, even though like everyone in the world that's a developer, when they first do this, they're going to use localhost. For whatever reason, Twitter doesn't allow you to use localhost. And I always forget exactly how I solve this problem. But I think this is what I end up doing, is just putting in, there's a couple different ways to do it, and we can Google it if this doesn't work. But I end up saying, okay, my website's cnn.com, go back to CNN.com, capture Twitter, and I think this will work.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
We can try that too. I don't think that works. HTTP.
I think you don't. I think you don't include the www.
Whatever.
Is that right?
Okay. So,
No, it's Welsh. There's no.
so Twitter recognized the format of my URL. The question is like, is this gonna work? Probably not, right? So what's gonna happen is at the end of that flow, Twitter is gonna send a redirect to my browser, and Twitter is gonna say, send a request to CNN.com, capture Twitter. And as far as I know, like I don't have control over the CNN.com web server, so I'm probably gonna run into a problem. What I've done in the past is I've changed that host file and I've redirected CNN.com to point to my local host. But let's also try, I like the idea of trying, yeah, the IP address. I feel like IP address doesn't work. I feel like I've tried that in the past, but let's try it. Is there no way to edit this?
I think if you Google it, you find a ton of people with that problem.
I absolutely agree, but let's see if we can figure this out on our own.
Modify app permissions.
Someone's gonna Google it.
Here we go.
Yeah.
All right, so let's put.
No, it's the callback, right?
I think I need to change both. No, actually, I don't think the website matters. What am I? I'm 14. I don't know if that will work. Let's try it though.
127 that 001 thing.
Does it?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, let's see if this one works too.
Try that
Oh
out.
shit. Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so that worked. Cool. Lewis said also the actual IP address 127.0.0. Was it .1? So this is the actual IP address of my loopback interface. Localhost is an alias for that. You can try that. Oh yeah, I do need the port though. Forgot about that.
Yeah, let's keep doing something else. No, so
Not a valid URL.
Yeah, don't do
can't
it.
take.
Interesting.
So what if we can do 3,000 here?
I mean, you need the port, otherwise it won't work.
I know, but it won't take.
That works. Yes.
So I put http://127.0.0.1.
And that worked?
Yeah.
So I think I was just missing the HTTP before.
What if you do HTTP localhost?
That will definitely not work.
Again, it won't.
We can try it though. That worked. All right, so let's put localhost.
You didn't have that.
Cool. So
Wait, that's a different error.
same error.
Oh,
So cool, we solved it together, right? We didn't have to Google it. So when you run into problems like this, just try kind of like thinking about what's going on, and just remember that all these things are alias for one another. Like localhost is an alias for this IP address. We could try my real IP address. You could try adding HTTP or not HTTP. Every service that I've tried this with has different requirements for like what this format has to be in. Super obnoxious, but it is what it is. All right, so now we got something working. Cool. So now Twitter, after I go to Twitter, Twitter's going to send a redirect to my browser. My browser is going to send a new request to this, and I am running the server at this port, so I should be able to catch this person when they get redirected.
like how like people want to find out more about your app. They go to the comments like, wow, this must be a legit app.
Cool. All right, so let me go back to oauth, see what oauth says I need to do. So they say, for example, in a Rails app, I would add a line in my routes file like get auth provider callback to sessions create. So it says, once the user has authenticated, what do you do next? Oauth simply sets a special hash called the authentication hash on the rack environment of a request to blah, blah, blah. This hash contains as much information about the user as oauth was able to glean from the utilized strategy. So my memory was that I could set any callback that I wanted. Looks like oauth says you need to do the callback in this specific format. But let's test if we can do our own callback URL, or whether oauth just overrides it to always tell Twitter to go here. Let's see what happens. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to send people to auth provider. So how do I make a link in a Rails app? Okay, so I need a route first. What do you want to route to? All right, so we could have the root go to like the homepage controller. There is not a homepage controller, so let's make one. Oh, this is not broken. There we go. All right, cool. I got my controller. Let me open up my controller. Oops. All right, so I got a route, right? Homepage is going to go to the home action for the root route. I don't have a home action. Okay, so I need a home action, right? And then what else do I need? Home template. So I'm going to go into app, views, homepage. I'm going to make a file called home.html.erb, and I'm going to make a link. So I'll use my, oops. I'll use ERB, link to, I'm going to link to Twitter, and that URL is going to be what oauth told me. Oauth said /auth/provider. So Twitter.
Is that initial slash necessary?
Yes. What's the key symbol? No, strings are fine for link to. Cool, so let me boot up my server. So now I should be able to go to the home route, right? And that should take me to the homepage controller, the home action, and to this view, and I should see a link. Awesome. So now I got my link to Twitter. So if I click on this, what's it called? Oauth should do is, we didn't see this route anywhere in my routes file, right? So we know that Oauth must magically be making this route by metaprogramming it. So a GET request to this route is going to magically redirect somewhere else. We don't know how that happens. We know that Oauth must be doing it because we didn't do it. But we trust that if we read the docs and they say that this will happen, it will happen. So I'm going to click on this. I go to auth Twitter, and I get 401 authorization required. So if we go back and think about like all of the things that oauth said I had to do, does anybody remember the first thing that oauth said I had to do? My key, right? So I have a fake key in here, right? So oauth tried to authenticate with Twitter, passing this BS key and secret. And then I said I had to go to Twitter and get the key and secret and then I went to Twitter and I got the key and secret, and then I didn't actually put them in my app. So this is a common sort of flow and mistake. And then you're like, I know I authenticated, like I don't know what's going on. So what's going on is we never actually took our keys from Twitter. So once I created my app, they gave me a key and a secret. So I'm just going to copy these. Again, not secure, but I don't really care.
But these are what you would say. You say these as a hash on your server, but not.
Yep.
Where would you store them?
So usually store them in a file. There's a gem called Figaro that does it, and there's another gem that I like. And then you just git ignore that file. But the gem will bring it into your environment by reading that file. And then you manually can send that file to your production server.
Can you just like have placeholder variables there and like call them?
That's also not.
But then they just go
Get ignore
to
that
where
file?
the source.
That is literally what we're talking about.
The hash.
But great idea. All right, I think I got to reboot the server because the initializer's already run. I'll start from scratch here. We'll go back. Cool. All right, so I'm going to reload. I'm going to send another GET request to auth Twitter, right? And hopefully something's going to happen in the background, something magical. I'm still getting authorization required. I did reboot my server.
Is it because the most of online
That's what this page is formatted. Word wrap.
Maybe not. I can't either. Because I just pasted it in. I think maybe when I copied it from the web page, it had an extra character because I copied it weird.
Yeah.
Oh, that happens.
Like when you do that, when you copy from
Spreadsheets.
and it puts it in quotes.
Cool. All right, worked this time. Yay! All right, so right, I said it's going to redirect to twitter.com. I didn't know what the exact URL was going to be, but the URL's cool. Let's look at this URL. So it redirected us to this secure URL, apitwitter.com/oauth/authenticate. So if you were to read the Twitter documentation, this is where they would say, this is where you send us the request to authenticate. OmniAuth just knows it. It's got it built in, right? But if you wanted, you could build all this yourself by reading the docs and figuring out, I need to redirect people to this, right? And then send these query parameters along. This OAuth token is something that gets like generated by the OAuth protocol. That's like kind of hidden inside the gem. This is another part that's like super complicated. So the whole OAuth protocol is actually quite complicated to implement yourself. So it's kind of nice to have a gem that will just do this for you, and you don't have to worry like, how do I properly generate the token and the timer and all these things that get passed back and forth.
Is that a unique hash that always is the same?
I think it's a unique hash that's always different,
Always different.
but don't quote me on that. Right, so now I'm at Twitter. I'm going to call sign in. I happen to already be signed into Twitter, and so I didn't have to put in my username and password. But if I wasn't logged into Twitter, like automatically in my session, I would have had to type in my username and password. And then Twitter sends a browser redirect back to my browser and says, send a request to this route. And so they automatically redirected me to auth Twitter callback. So we can see that here, right? This is where I ended up. We went from here to here. So I was wrong. There's no way for us to, at Twitter, say this is the URL that we want to send it back to. Because of the way the protocol works, Twitter, you can tell them, here's where I want you to send me back to. But also, as you're implementing the protocol, when you send the request, you can send a parameter that says, here's the callback URL. And so that's what OmniAuth ends up doing. Is it always wants the callback to come to the same place so that it's standardized. So I can't just tell Twitter, hey, let me override that, because that parameter gets passed to them by OmniAuth. Yeah, so if I was implementing the protocol myself, I could send a header that says, here's the callback URL.
Yeah.
Or if I don't send the header at all, Twitter will just use what they have on file. But because I don't control OmniAuth, and I don't think there's a setting inside OmniAuth, I don't think you can actually change it unless you were to like go into the gem itself and,
So you can just
change
make
the
that
code.
route and then have it redirect to your home page or something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, once I'm at localhost, I don't care what the route is because I can just put this into my routes and capture it. But just right now, I don't have a route that matches this, right? So I got back to my Rails server. My Rails server is like, for this URL, right, like I don't know what to do. I don't have a route. So let's make a route.
Would you, if you wanted to, you also get them redirect it and you get that request?
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, that seems kind of like there's no benefit to redirecting once you've already got the request. So I'm just going to, as OmniAuth told me to, OmniAuth said, this is what I should put in my routes. What?
But that actually kind of solves my question. I was going to ask, like, how does it save the fact that you're logged into your Twitter and that just all sessions?
Yep. So I'm going to capture this, right? It's not auth provider, it's auth Twitter. And I know that because this is actually where it redirected me to, right? Auth Twitter. So auth Twitter callback, I want to capture that, and I can send that wherever I want, right? Whatever controller I want to handle that, I can capture it there. So sessions is typically where we would send this to be semantic. I'm going to redirect it to the whatever controller just to make the point that it doesn't matter. There's nothing magical about the sessions controller. It is just a controller that is going to do something. So I'm going to redirect it to the whatever controller and to the create action. So I don't have a whatever controller or a create action, so I'm going to
When you
make
make
one.
a controller, there's a way you can make actions at the same time, right?
Maybe. I always find trying to memorize these like crazy incantations is a little silly. I just do it manually.
I like the incantations because I always forget the name of all of them, but my real bad
I mean, that's kind of why I don't like them, is because if you memorize the incantation, then you don't actually know what's going on.
I mean, I always look at the terminal what it actually means.
Okay, so I said the whatever controller and the create action. All right, so I'm going to throw pry in here. So I'm going to do this whole flow, right? And at the end, I'm going to end up here. And then I'm going to see kind of like what stuff got sent to me back from Twitter. So I'm going to add pry.
Actually, I had this annoying problem with Rails when using pry. I had to put pry in my config. Where bars are used.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to the beginning of the flow, right? I'm going to go to localhost 3000. I'm going to send my GET request to Twitter. Twitter is going to just send me back now because I'm already signed in at Twitter. So don't think that there's anything magic happening. I'm already signed in at Twitter. So if you watch, I'm going to get sent to Twitter. I'm going to get redirected back. All that's still happening. It's just going to happen really quick, right? Redirecting you back to the application because I'm already signed in. Now I should be back in Rails. Here I am. So, what was the purpose of doing all of this? Why are we doing this? Yes, and why are we generating a unique and secure session? What's the thing that we call that? Logging in, right? You're being very specific. So I want to log somebody in, right? And what does logging in mean? It means creating like a session, right, for somebody. So the goal of all of this is to create a session, and also I want to capture the keys that Twitter sent me back for this particular user. So when I log in with Twitter, Twitter will send back like some tokens that I can capture, and then in the future I can make requests on behalf of this user to Twitter. So let me look at what's in my params. So in my params, I have this oauth token and I have this oauth verifier. So let me look at OmniAuth and see what OmniAuth says. So in Rails, I have this request object. And OmniAuth says they're going to stuff, OmniAuth simply sets a special hash called the authentication hash on the rack environment of a request. So Rails has this request object. and it has all this information about the request. So oauth says if I just call this env method on the request object, it's stuffed some stuff in there. So let me look at that stuff. So here's env, and it says if I give it the key of oauth.auth, that's where it put all the stuff. So what do I get back? I get back all of this cool information that Twitter sent me. So when I logged in with Twitter, Twitter sent back to my application basically like the stuff that Twitter knows about me, right? So my profile URL, where I am, my name, my nickname, my user ID, which is some sort of unique identifier at Twitter, and my credentials, which are my token and secret. So,
That's what you meant that it like authenticates and also gives them access
yes.
when they
So the goal of all of this is a couple things. Where am I? Whatever controller, right? So I need to do two things. I need to save this data I got back from Twitter.
You need to save it for the model? Or is that-
Yeah, yeah. And I need to put that user into the session. So I'm going to make a user model so that I can store myself in my database. Right? I'm not going to store my username and password because I don't have that, but I am going to store the tokens that Twitter gave me that sort of represent a username and password.
So you're going to attach specified content to user, Twitter user, right?
Yes. So I'm going to make a model called user. We'll give it user ID, which will be an integer. We'll give it name, which will be a string. We'll give it oauth.
Why are you like? Oh no.
That's what I got from Twitter. That's my unique Twitter ID. An OAuth token, which will be a string. An OAuth secret, which will be a string. And do I get anything else that's important? UID. So I don't really care about any of this other stuff.
I mean, the image would be like,
You have,
Yeah, if I want to give somebody like their
you have something called token and secret, and then OAuth token and OAuth secret. So do you need both those, or just OAuth?
these guys are the ones that I need. But I think they're all the same. Cool. So I'll make this model. I think this generates a migration. Right? Yeah, okay. I'll run my migration, and then I should be able to create users. Cool. Now I got my users table. I'm going to reboot my server. I'm going to go through the flow again. So now in here, I'm going to actually do this stuff, hopefully. Start the whole flow again. Because of the way the OAuth protocol works, there's no way to kind of just jump into the middle of it. So you always go through the whole thing again. All right, so I should be in pry again. So now I should be able to create a user based on this data. So let me do that. So I want to do something like user equals user.create, and I need to give it a OAuth token. I need to give it an OAuth secret, user ID, and a name. Is that it? Cool. All right, so let me figure out where those things are in the environment. So if I do that, UID, that'll give me my user ID. What's that? Yeah, so I got to call 2i on that. So I'm going to make a method called auth, which we'll call this, so I don't have to keep calling it. I'll make a method called uid, which calls auth and gives it the key of uid. What else do I need? I need name, right? So info, name, cool. And then I need my credentials. No, because I need to save it into.
I was saying, if there's a hash and then call it. But
I'm just going to say secret and what is it? Token. Cool. So now I can call token secret UID and name. So this is going to create all this stuff, create this user, and then I have to put this user in the session. So I'm going to say session user ID equals user.id. So now somebody should be logged in, and now I should be able to redirect them. Let's just send them home. Is it redirect or redirect to?
You can use a redirect with an S or redirect _T.
So we'll send them to the root URL. So I'm just going to run this. What's that? Yeah, that's what I'm doing. So let me just run this in the. Oh, I don't have those methods yet. All right, so we'll run this one more time.
I suggest making the user of instant variable so that do the or you can still do that with local.
You're saying redirect to user?
No, I mean, yeah, but you can still use a local variable in the other.
Well, I want to redirect them. I don't want to create an instance variable. I'm just going to send them like back. They're logged in now. I'm just going to send them home. Back to the beginning. So I can take pry out. All right, I'm going to go through the flow again. And in theory, I should end up back at the home page. A user should have been created, and now I should be logged in. So that was like the whole Twitter sign-in flow. So now in theory, I should be able to go into my console, and I should be able to see that user. And there it is. So I made that user. Now I have my OAuth token, and I have my OAuth secret. So that was the first part, right? I said I want to be able to log in with Twitter. I have logged in with Twitter. I have accomplished my goal. The second part is I want to be able to read a user's tweets. So how do I read a user's tweets? So the reason I saved my OAuth token and my OAuth secret was because I can send requests to Twitter using the OAuth protocol and say, this is the app I'm making a request on behalf of, and this is the user I'm making a request on behalf of. And Twitter will say, okay, you are who you say you are. You can do stuff at Twitter. So how do we do that? Surprisingly, there's a Twitter gem that implements the OAuth protocol. So most of these gems wrap the actual OAuth gem. You can use the raw OAuth gem, but it's super complicated. I much more encourage you to just use one of these gems. These gems are great. So I can start reading again the docs on the gem. So it says Twitter API version 1.1 requires you to authenticate via OAuth, so you'll need to register your application with Twitter. Once you register an application, make sure to set the correct access level. Your new application will be assigned a consumer key secret pair. You'll be assigned an OAuth access token secret pair for that application. You need to configure these values before you make a request, or you'll get the hour, the error, bad authentication data, right? So all of this makes sense. Sounds like we've done all of this. And then I get to the code, right? They're saying this is how you like do stuff. So typically what's going to happen is you're going to instantiate an instance of an object, and that object will sort of store the credential inside of it. And then anytime you call a method on that object, it's going to make a request and pass along those credentials to Twitter or to Facebook or to whomever.
I'm assuming you don't use those generic strings that you use in real.
You got it.
Bingo.
So as Gil pointed out, this is the part of the app, of the code, right, where this stuff's generic. You're going to replace with these generic things with our actual keys, right? The only thing that's kind of confusing about this is like consumer key and consumer secret versus access token and access token secret. This even confuses me. So I always forget which ones are the ones that I got from the user and which are the two that are sort of global to the application. So let me come back here and see what Twitter calls it. So what Twitter gave me, the application owner, is the consumer key and the consumer secret. What I got back from signing in with Twitter was the access token and the access token secret. So these two values are going to be the same for any user of my application. These two values are going to be the specific values for this user. So let me just throw this into a file for a second. So I'm going to replace these values with my keys. What?
Where were the methods that say those are the models?
Yes.
You don't
In the controller.
you don't access.
Well, I'm just gonna do this like right in the Rails console. All right, so I got my consumer key and my consumer secret. Right, these are global to my application, and then I need a user access token and a user secret. So I'm gonna make this user dot. I'm just doing this in the console, just to like a proof of concept before I put it into the app. So I called these OAuth token and OAuth secret in my user. So I'll call this user.oauth token. User.oauth secret. And then I'm just going to paste this right into my console. But I forgot to require the Twitter gem. I forgot to install the Twitter gem.
So when you log in with your authenticate with your consumer key, that would be the user logging in. Yeah, but I'm saying if someone else is using the app, that would be their key. That's who you report.
But remember, you did like a git ignore, so you wouldn't have it.
So if I log into the app, it's going to be my token and my secret. If you log into the app, it's going to be your token and your secret.
But the consumer key is going to always stay constant.
And these two will always be the
But
same.
that's why you git ignore it and you push it up to git, and then when you put it in development, I guess there's a way.
But it confuses. It still is like kind of
Because you think consumer is your person, yeah.
So
It's like Twitter's consumer.
I was
you
on
not.
Tumblr's API,
Mm-hmm.
and they give you some post access. So I'm assuming a user can use my app and create posts on their Tumblr.
Yep.
using my app. Awesome.
Yeah, you're like these websites.
I thought it was fucking impossible, but like save the day.
I can't require Twitter. What is going on? Oh, I need it in the gem file. I'm in the console, not in IRB, so I need to put it in the gem file. I forgot that, so let's do this again. Now Twitter should be required. Should be able to find my user, and I should be able to paste this stuff in. Cool. So the whole purpose of this was to get an object. That object is called client. This object now holds all my authentication information in it, right? You can actually see it in the visual representation of it. And now if I call methods, it will make HTTP requests to the Twitter API on behalf of my user and my application. So you can do two things. You can look at twitter.com's dev docs and see like what's possible, or you can just kind of like look through this gem's usage examples. So the nice thing about a gem is you're wrapping up complicated HTTP calls where you have to like put the right string and put your credentials in and all that, and now you're just calling methods, which are super easy. So let's do fetch the timeline of tweets by a user. Or fetch the timeline of tweets from the authenticated user's homepage. This is probably the easiest thing that we could call. So I'm going to make this request to Twitter. What do we expect to come back from this method call?
The person's timeline.
The range between the first two and the last.
Let's just try it.
Did you put any parameters?
Isn't it whatever they look like it is?
I mean, yeah, probably.
Oh, it's a tweet object.
Right? So somebody wrote this gem. If I make a raw HTTP call, you were right. We're going to get JSON, right? But what got returned got parsed by this Twitter client. It wrapped it up into an array of objects, right? Because we want to use objects, not low-level stuff. So response.first is going to give me the first tweet, right? And then I can call like methods minus object methods to see like what's all the like interesting stuff here. And let's sort this. So these are all the things that I can call on an individual tweet object. And as you might imagine, this is really just like a hash wrapped up in an object. So there's probably like a content method or something, or text. Text, here we go. So there's the tweet, right? So this is the tweet that's at the top of my timeline right now, right? So if I wanted to print out the text of all of the tweets I got back, how would I do that?
What's the object? All?
Response.all.text.
No, what's your question?
If I want to print out the tweets, the text of all the tweets that I just got back, how would I do that?
Iterate and call dot.
Absolutely. So I'd iterate and call text on all of them. So here's all my tweets, right?
Nope, you're doing it
Am
wrong.
I? Oh. Where?
Nope, sorry.
Oh. Super like on Tinder. Whoa, big news. Cool. All right, so I got these objects back, right? And what I would like to do is I'd like to like show them off in my app, right? So that's the next part. So let's put this into the app. Now we know how to do it, and I highly encourage you when you're doing something like this, test it out in the console. Don't put it in the context of a request, because then every time you screw it up, you have to refresh and hit the right route, and you have to have a view, and like who cares, right? Like you're just making a request. This has nothing to do with Rails. So test it out in the console. Once you get it working, sure. Yeah, that is kind of amazing.
Oh, what the fuck? I just saw that.
I don't really know how that works. I guess terminal support emoticons.
Let's bring us
Yosemite?
Yeah, I think that.
They just added.
Did he support fucking videos?
Cool. All right, so I am going to add this into Rails. What route do we want to put this at?
Timeline.
Sure, timeline. So a get request to /timeline is going to show me my timeline. What's the syntax here? Hash So this will go to, let's call it the tweets controller to the timeline view, timeline action. So I need a tweets controller, right?
When you're like using APIs or scraping or whatever, what is the best kind of place to do that? Because I might have screwing around an API and I'm like, but I don't want to be it to have a controller or model or anything or associated with any of those things.
Have a model that does it for you.
But that model, take the Magic Record. I don't exactly what it's doing all the
They don't have to.
They don't have to.
You don't have to. Only if like you want it to do something in the database, you just have a model, and then and you have like a required relative to wherever you want to throw that.
All right, so I already know what I need to do, right? I need to find a user. I need to instantiate them. And then I need to ask for their tweets. So this is going to be, I did. I don't know where I went though. Here? Here it is. Thank you. So which user is this going to be?
Whoever is the one.
Whoever is the one.
Whoever would redirect it to Twitter and came back.
So how do I refer to whoever is logged in right now?
The user
Session, absolutely. So typically what we do is we make a method called current user in application for controller. And that will look to see if we have somebody logged in.
and if not, it redirects the login.
Well, this method wouldn't redirect to login, but if you had a before filter that called like current user or something like that, that would do the redirect. All right, so I'm going to look in the database for my user. So I got to find by something. Probably going to find by ID, right? Because that's what in my whatever controller, I put the user's ID into the session. So if somebody's logged in, I'm going to look into the session for the user ID, which should be the ID of the user. Should give me a user object. Otherwise, excuse me. Otherwise, what should we do in current user? We could create a blank user object. For now, let's just do this. We'll assume somebody's logged in, and we'll deal with the case of where they're not logged in a minute. So this is going to give me the user object, right? My current user, anytime I call that, as long as somebody's logged in. So here, in the tweets controller, I have access to my application controller's methods because I inherit from it. So rather than just calling the generic user, I want to speak about the specific user that's logged in right now. When you say it, what do you mean? This method? So what is the user class? So this must be talking to our database, right? If we had like the client object and we were talking to Twitter or something, it's possible it could be looking through Twitter's database. All right, cool. So now we should be able to log in. Grab the current user. We should be able to grab their token. So let's see what happens. Cool, so let's go through the whole flow. So after somebody's logged in, rather than redirecting them to home, we'll redirect them to timeline. They should be logged in, and we should be able to see their tweets. Is there anything that's missing from the flow right now? So I'm gonna log in. I'm gonna create the person. I'm gonna put their session in, and then I'm gonna redirect them to timeline. Anything else that's missing? So we definitely need a view for the tweets timeline. So let's make that. All right. So this is going to make the client object, right? And then we said we need to make a request with that client object. And the way we make that request is we call a method. What was the method? Home timeline. And we want to store what comes back, right, as the response object. We can call it whatever we want. And then we want to make something that we're going to send to the view. I'll call it tweets. And tweets are right. So we're going to make a new array that's not the objects. It's just tweets in an array. We'll send it to the view, and the view will just do something simple like take the tweets and print them out.
Do you need an equal sign on top?
I do not. Thank you. So I'll just iterate through the tweets and print them out. Let's add a BR all together. Cool. There's one other thing that's a little wonky here. So every time I go through the flow, I'm going to create a new user.
Yeah, right.
So this is kind of problematic.
So
Have
if
something
it's
down
not
there.
current user, and then in application, your name, controller, that's what I did.
So Active Record has a method called find or create, which is great, which will kind of do this for me. But just to be super explicit, I need to look in the database first and see whether or not I've created this user. What's the unique thing that I can use to figure out whether or not this user exists or not?
The UID?
UID. Yes. So Twitter gave me back a UID, which stands for unique ID. So Twitter has like a unique key that they're giving me, and I can look in the database, and every time they're going to give me that back, and I can say, hey, this is like a unique identifier for this person. Let me look that up. So I'm going to say user equals user.find by UID. I'll pass in the UID that I just got back from Twitter, right? And if this exists, if that doesn't return nothing, then I want to put them in the session, right? Otherwise, I need to create them, right? And then put them in the session. So I guess either way, I need to put them in the session, right? So just put that down here still. So if I find them, right, save them as the user object. If I don't find them, I'll create them, save them as the user object, and then I'll put them in the session either way, and I'll redirect them to the timeline.
You can just, like, if that whole thing is excellent.
What?
Like, instead of using else, you can just use
I'm just trying to keep it like really explicit, really simple here, so that everyone can follow. All right, cool. So I'm gonna go through the flow again and see what happens. I'm gonna reboot my server just because I'm not sure where I am. All right, so somebody talk me through this whole flow, everything that's gonna happen before this runs. Brian,
Log in. It's gonna say, well,
let's be more specific.
all right. So you're gonna send the OAuth authentication to Twitter.
Okay, what happens before that? How does that OAuth authentication happen? What's the first? Okay, so I have to click Twitter, and what does that do?
It's gonna send you to Twitter's OAuth. And that's
Talk to me in terms of like GET requests.
Yeah.
So how do I know where a link is going to go to? Well, so I can just see at the bottom here, right? It's gonna go to auth Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So it's gonna send a GET request to auth Twitter, and then you said the route would then tell me how to handle that. So what's it called? OmniAuth is then gonna do the redirect for me somehow magically, and then what happens?
It's gonna send you back to the callback.
So yeah, so it's gonna send me over to Twitter. It's gonna send me back to my callback. Where's my callback? It is So this guy's my callback, right?
That goes back to.
So Twitter's gonna send me a browser redirect, which is gonna send me here, right? And where this redirects me to, or not redirects me, where I handle this is in my whatever controller and the create action, right? Yeah, it's like a sessions controller, right? And then in here, I'm gonna do what?
Create a user.
Or
check if the user already exists.
Okay.
If
And
it exists or it has been created, redirect it.
I'm gonna put the user in the session, right? Okay, so then we're gonna redirect to the timeline. And how do I know where timeline goes? It's in my routes. Right? So I'm gonna send a get request to timeline, right? And then that's gonna go to what? The
tweets
and the
timeline.
cool. And then I come here, and what is happening here? And what happens here?
So when you authenticate Twitter sends you the information of the user, which is like their access token and the token secret.
Yeah.
And so you're grabbing that information from the hash of the sender, and then from that, I forget what happens after that. That's used to then grab the person's timeline. I forget how that happens.
It's okay. Gil, you want to take over?
So the Twitter gem, it makes an object that has all that crap that we got before. That gigantic.
So where do these come from?
That comes from your authentication.
Yeah.
From my app, right? So I registered here, right?
Yeah.
So these are my keys and secrets, my consumer keys and secrets. Where does this come from?
That comes from user.
Okay, that's what I got back from Twitter. So this whole thing instantiates this client object, and then what?
And then you just call some built-in Twitter gem message and make it look pretty on the grid.
So we call home timeline, right? This gives it back a response. We iterate through it. We send it to our view. All right, cool. Good work, guys.
That's it. Then from there you just manipulate everything in the models and.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I constructed a path where you could never be nil, but I was gonna say we should handle that case for sure. In the current user method, I need to deal with the case where this is nil.
You said something. I asked that question earlier. You said something off the begin method, the before method.
Oh, I was saying current user would so probably like what would happen is you'd have a before filter that would ask somebody to authenticate, and that would redirect, or not a before filter, before action, and that would redirect them to log in if they were not logged in.
If it's nil, that runs.
The before action is going to see if you. It's
Session. So session is nil. Then you log in.
So we're gonna ask you to authenticate. We're gonna say like, are you logged in or not, right? And if you are logged in, we're gonna run that action. If you are not logged in, we should redirect you to log in, and we figure out whether or not you are logged in by calling current user and seeing whether we have a current user. If current user fails, then we should redirect you. If it does, then we're good.
That's your.
You can like change current user a little bit and go. I forgot exactly what this does, but so you would do something like current user double pipe equals user find all that. But you find it in session, yeah, just like that, and if session I'd have to give you all this code.
Very
So how does Twitter recognize which apps send the request for the authorization?
That's the.
But token, you're sending token in the API call, not the authorization call.
So when we initialize oauth, we make this initializer and we give it our app key and secret. And then when it makes when I hit this button and it makes that request, along with the request, it passes along headers that have my those two things. And that's how it knows who I am.
So you need to pass this like secret key and API key both times while you're making a get call and then you
Yeah, so when I'm first doing the authentication, I have to let it know which app is doing the authentication. And then whenever I make a request on behalf of a user, I have to say, here's the app that's making the request, and here's the user that's making the request. The first part is just the app, and then once I get the credentials back, then I have to say, okay,
Is there a reason? Because like access token should be like, unique to the app
yes.
and the user. So why do you need to set it?
Why do you need to send what?
Secret key again and again? Because like secret the access token is like a unique thing that's unique to app and the user. Right? So it's or like if anyone else can get the access token, they won't be able to make the call, right?
So if I want to ask Twitter to do something that needs user level permissions, I have to send along the token saying, here's the app that's making the request, and here's the user that's making the request every time, so that it knows who's the app that's making the request and who's the user.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying, because access token is like unique hash, right? So shouldn't be able to Twitter shouldn't be able to know which app does this access token belong to.
Yeah, I guess I feel like you're making my point that like it knows who I am because I send it the token.
Yeah. No, but why do you need to tell I'm this app and this is the user token?
Like, why can't you just make the request on behalf of the user?
Because you already have the access token, and that access token belongs to your app anyway. So why do you need to tell it again and again? Oh, this is my app.
Oh, you're saying because the user token is paired with the app token already. So if I send the user token to them, they should be able to figure out what app it came from. That's a good question. I don't know. It's part of the protocol.
Because I remember trying something with GitHub, they didn't require me to send my client
They didn't require you to send the.
consumer key.
I'm very surprised by that.
They were just, I just needed access token, and anyone could take the access token and make a request.
I mean, I think in this case we're like changing the words. So there's the user level permissions and there's the app level permissions. If you're making a request to GitHub and you're passing permissions and it's not specific user permissions, I'm guessing that you're passing your app level permissions.
No, like let's say Vin could come into my app, right, and then sign in, and then I would get access token for it,
Mhm.
and when it comes on behalf of me, I will need client keys for my app.
Interesting. I think you're wrong, but it's possible that you're right. In which case, like, then surely for GitHub, they don't require it. For Twitter, they do.
So
It may be because GitHub uses OAuth 2.0 and Twitter uses 1.0.
use it one time.
Yeah, Twitter uses 1.0. And GitHub may use 2.0.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can tell you this gem won't work if you don't put that in. So, whatever the rationale is, like security, whatever, I'm not a security guy. I'm sure there's a reason. I don't know what it is. So when I make that request, Twitter is going to say, we're going to generate this new token and secret and send it back to them. And yeah, that's completely automated on their side.
And that's not temporary like a session. It's like it's the same every time.
So typically it expires. So typically you'll get it for like 30 days or something like that. So that like you don't have permission forever. And like if that token expires, when you send the request, it'll say expired token, you must re-authenticate. And then you'll have to go through the flow again where you have to like give your credentials. You'll get a new token and you'll have to like replace
So
it.
why do we make that persist in our like models?
I mean, we did, right?
Yeah, but why? If it's
Why?
expired?
Well, if it's going to last for 30 days, then wouldn't it be better to keep it for 30 days than to get rid of it and make the user re-authenticate every time?
Yeah, I guess so.
Somebody does it once every 30 days.
Can you go back to your create method?
Sure.
Okay, with the if statement, don't you need another question? Not question, equal sign to check if the user equals?
Here?
Yeah.
So this is going to run this
Wait,
code.
I understand that, but will it work with just one equal sign?
Yeah. This is intentional that I'm using one equal sign. So I'm saying run this whole block, right? User find by UID. This is either going to return nil or it's going to return a user object. It's going to save that to the local variable user. So the whole return value of this statement is either nil or it's the user object. So nil is
Everything
false.
True except for false and nil.
So if
then it'll
I'm
just
basically
be
saying if nil, which is if false, then do this other thing.
Or if
nil. Or if anything else, then it's going to be true.
If what?
and then
That's
it'll
if
be
not. Oh yeah.
Right, nil is going to be returned by
It's like-
find by ID.
cool way to do it.
All right, let's see if this actually works. Screwed something up. Missing template tweets timeline. Maybe I spelled it wrong or something. Probably tweets. Somebody over here? What at you? Oh, thank you. Yeah, at tweets. Awesome. Okay, so 2 problems there. I think I should be able to just reload this. Cool. And there we go. There's all my tweets. Or there's all the tweets from my
And then you bring
my
Gian
account.
in and he puts CSS on it. That's awesome.
So certainly, like, we could flesh a lot of this out and make it like much more professional. But this is the basic flow, right?
Can we post in a similar fashion, or is that more complicated?
We probably have to work with the post method.
Yeah. So if you come here and say, right, so update, I'm tweeting with a gem. So once I authenticate, I can call client to update, and I can send a tweet from the command line.
Wow. Okay.
So this stuff is really fun. Once you can like OAuth with other providers, you can get your playlists from Spotify and make like a Spotify app, or you can make people allowed to like interact with Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And there's like so many cool services that you can interact with and build stuff on top of, and it becomes like really fun and opens up a lot of possibilities.
This is like the average person may not be able to figure it out, but it doesn't take like a high level like master developer to sort of like play around and like learn this.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's like now you think about all those times like on Facebook and like I don't mind. Like, the person can just like learn and do all this stuff if they wanted to with the information.
They also post on your behalf.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Client.update is posting.
So like if I go to
Yeah, so when you do this authentication, there's different levels of permissions that can happen. I don't know the specifics of Twitter and like how you restrict those permissions. But usually, like I know GitHub, when you do this authentication, you usually add a scope to things, and the scope is like here's this level of permission that I'm requesting on behalf of this user, so that when you get to this page, or where is it? When you get to like to that Twitter side and they're logging in, it'll say this app is requesting like these sets of permissions. Twitter may be a binary, like you get everything or nothing. I know certainly with Facebook, it's like specific permissions that you can have. GitHub for sure, same thing. Other questions? All right, perfect timing. No.
How would you go about refactoring to use the environment? So like instead of hardcode?
To use the environment? Oh, yeah, I'll show you.
Yeah, having that just copy and paste.
This is the one that I like. There's two .m and Figaro. I started using this one instead of Figaro. I forget why. So it says Story configuration in the environment is one of the tenets of a 12-factor app. So if I make a file called .env, it will load into the env hash. So it says add this to the top of your application gem file. And it says .env is initialized in your Rails app during the before configuration, callback, blah, blah, blah. Usage. Add your application configuration to your .env file in the root of your project. So in the root of my project, I'm going to make a .env file. And then I just do something like this. All right, so just key value pairs. Oops. So what are the key value pairs I need? Let's call it Twitter key, Twitter secret. Then I'll go back to my oauth initializer. I'll take these guys out.
So now, why for this it doesn't require a string? This is gem just knows it's a string.
What's that?
The gem just knows it's a string.
Yep. So now, let me, probably don't have pry loaded up by this point, but let's see. Actually, I think if I just put do Rails C, I should be able to spec my environment. So when you do this, I encourage you to check that it worked in the way that you thought it worked. Just go into the console or something like that. That's going to load the Rails environment. And then I should be able to say env Twitter key and make sure it actually got put in there. Because sometimes you missed a step. It's so slow. I think it's dead. I think my computer's had it. Well, anyways, that's how you do it.